Hi, I'm going to go through the perspectives on the role of education. I went through these on a separate video, but I'm going to go through them with some key questions from the textbook to see if I can help clear up any difficulties or errors in understanding. So let's look at the first question. How far does education provide all individuals with equal opportunities for achievement? So that's on page 67. So in terms of that question, firstly, functionalists, they believe in the concept of meritocracy. So on that basis, all individuals are provided with the same opportunities to achieve their potentials, to have their skills identified and developed, and their talents identified, and to be allocated to roles that suit them. And so the functionalist view really fits in with this argument about equal opportunities. So functionalists, okay, so a big thumbs up there. Okay, let's look at Marxists. What do they say? How far do they think equal opportunities are provided for everyone by education? So the Marxist view is that there's not equal opportunities, that the idea of meritocracy is just an illusion, and that the reality is that there's class inequalities. The working class aren't given the same opportunities as the rich, middle class and upper class students, and therefore there's this unfair two-class system, and education just reproduces this class inequality. So Marxism, big thumbs down to equal opportunities. What about the New Right? What do they think about this? So yeah, they think that equal opportunities should be provided by education. They think that that there is differences in students, just as the functionalists would argue, but they do think the education system has failed to provide enough choice to consumers, because it tends to let down the poorer students, because often the public, the state system just doesn't give enough choice and flexibility. So equal opportunities, yes, the New Right would basically agree with that, but there needs to be more kind of privatisation of the system, so it functions more like a market where people have choice and they kind of buy the services that they want. So New Right, we're going to say a thumbs up for equal opportunities, broadly speaking. Let's look at, that's about it. I was going to also mention Interactionists and Postmodernists. They're used to kind of evaluate in the book. So equal opportunities, the Interactionists would give a thumbs down, because they would argue that there's labelling of working class students. If you look at Willis's study in the Marxism section of the textbook for the role of education, so on page 72, Willis actually used a interactionist methodology. So he was interested in studying meaning, so he was asking questions, he was doing a lot of observation. So he was looking for labels, he was looking for the way the students were labelled by the teachers and the way the students labelled themselves. So in that sense, interactionists say there's not equal opportunities. Now, Willis was also using a Marxist approach in how he would explain education generally. So he was saying that in this case the working class lads were reproducing the class inequality, partly because their own culture was not valuing education, and it was valuing what they saw as proper work, physical work, work outside the school classroom. So So interactionists, they're a big thumbs down for equal opportunities. They see education as featuring a lot of inequality based on as a result of labelling, and then that brings us to postmodernists. So postmodernists argue that education is now more diverse. So there's students from different backgrounds. They do argue that this diversity has led to the kind of breaking down of some of the old class identities, and so in some ways there's more fragmentation and therefore there's more choice. So students from different backgrounds may be able to achieve social mobility. So that sounds like a thumbs up for equal opportunities. It basically depends on the student, and it also depends on the choices they make. That can be limited by their culture and the lifestyle of people from their kind of background. So this still can be limits on equal opportunities. So they would not probably go as far as Marxists in saying that equal opportunities are limited by class, there's no equal opportunities at all, and so people do have more choice. Okay, so we've got the postmodernists. Now the second question, how far or how much does education recreate class inequalities? So here we're basically talking about Marxism. Okay, so the Marxists would give a big thumbs up to this view that education recreates class inequalities. Okay, so that they're the ones who argue that there's a two-class system, which means there's the poor and there's the rich. They argue that the rich own the means of production, which is the factories, the tools, the resources, the raw materials with which things are made. The poor own nothing, so they are powerless because all the power is to do with money. Okay, so the poor don't have the money, they don't own things, so they don't have power. Okay, because Marxists believe that power is based on money. This is what we call economic power. So the Marxists believe that working class have to sell their kind of time, their labour power to the capitalists. So there's a two-class system. So that's the class inequality. Okay, the rich have ownership and power. The poor have no ownership and no power. So that's class inequality. Okay, it leads to, or you can see the symptoms of that in all the other aspects of life. So just as if you have a terrible illness, you can see the symptoms perhaps in someone's skin, their appearance, the pallor of the colour of their skin, whether there's a good kind of healthy look to their body, their ability to walk and exercise, and so on. All these, what they can eat and so on. So in the same way, Marxists argue you can see in a capitalist society that because of this class inequality, you've got all these different aspects of society where you see the same class inequality being reinforced and being demonstrated in education, religion, media, gender relations between men and women, and so on, the family, and so on. So class inequality, and education recreates the class inequality, and that means that education takes the students and it basically gives them this picture, which they've been given since they were young as well through the media and their family, gives us this picture of life that you're either this class or this class, and this is your position, and this is how it's going to stay, and it basically keeps you in your place, and so it recreates class inequality, and that's what education does. So looking at the detail, we need to then look at Althusser, who looks at the way in which education serves to reproduce class inequality, and the way it does this is just by kind of brainwashing us. Bowles and Gintis talk about schooling in capitalist America. So a way of summing that up is basically, if you look at Google Earth and you say, you know, I'm going to zoom in on my street where I live. Let's say I live in Banbury and I zoom in on my street in Banbury. I don't live in Banbury, but if I did live in Banbury and I zoomed in on my street in Banbury and I say, you know, this street in Banbury is like a perfect example of what Banbury is basically like as a whole. That's what Bowles and Gintis is saying about education for capitalism. Like, education is, you know, each classroom and the overall institution of education is acting as like a microcosm for capitalism. So it's basically teaching people what capitalism is like, and it's teaching them class inequality on a small scale, so when they go into the big version of capitalism in the wider world, they know what to expect and that they fit into it and they're obedient. So, for example, there's a correspondence between the external rewards of having an examination certificate. So you've got a certificate, you've got that grade in that subject. There's a correspondence between that and the external rewards in work, where you get a salary, you get a pay slip, you get paid money, you might get, you know, a reward for being a hard worker. So the point here is that you're not enjoying education, you're not, you know, they're teaching you education is something you do that's not for the sake of education and the joy of education, the joy of learning itself. It's something you do for an external reward, and so you'll learn that work is something you do for an external reward. You don't do it for the inherent satisfaction, the satisfaction in and of itself of the work. Okay? So people get used to the fact that work's boring and it has external rewards. So that's Bowles and Gintis. Myth of meritocracy, legitimation of class inequality. So they were just saying that education is basically making it seem okay to have class inequality by giving us this illusion or this not real idea that education is fair and that the best people are given the best jobs and the best rewards, and those who didn't get the best rewards and the best jobs just didn't work hard enough or weren't clever enough. So that's the myth of meritocracy. We're given this kind of illusion or this not real idea. And then I explained about Willis. So Willis is basically showing us how people end up in working class jobs because of their working class culture, which doesn't fit into the middle class culture and makes them reject middle class culture. So yeah, so in the answer to the question, how far does education recreate class inequalities? That's a big thumbs up from Marxism. They really agree with that view. What about functionalists? Do they agree that education recreates class inequalities? No, big thumbs down from them. They don't believe that. They believe that education is an open playing field where people are given chances regardless of their background, and they're given, you know, roles based on their ability and their effort and their talent. So who they really are, how hard they really work, and what they're really putting in terms of time, that will all be reflected. It's not going to reflect their previous class background and the background of their parents, which is what the Marxists say it will reflect. Right, the new right, what do they think? Do they think that education recreates class inequalities? No, they agree with functionalists that it's basically an open playing field, that it's fluid, so status is fluid, you can change it. Education helps you to change your status, just like water changes from one state to another and moves from one place to another. So a river just kind of keeps moving and goes round corners and goes you know, wherever it wants, really. In the same way, people in society are able to change their position and their identity. So there's not this class system. According to the New Right, there's just an open playing field. So the New Right would give a big thumbs down to the view that education recreates class inequalities. Postmodernists, they would give a thumbs down to the idea that education recreates class inequalities, because they believe that there's a kind of fragmentation or breaking down and breaking apart of the class system. So increasingly there's not this two-class system which the Marxists describe, and they predicted it would get even more two-class with a smaller rich and a bigger working class group. That's what the Marxists thought. The postmodernists think that there's this breaking down of the class system, people have more choice over their identity, and therefore class inequalities are not reinforced and reproduced. Instead, there's actually more diversity, which is what education reflects.